Welcome to another episode of the Podcast Profits Unleashed podcast, where we like to empower coaches and consultants to use podcasting as a tool to drive leads and sales into their business. Talking with successful coaches who are doing that exact thing, whether they're hosting a podcast or whether they're purely guesting on podcasts. So today I have Ryan Gottfredson, and he is a leadership coach. And this title of this episode is all about becoming better. If you want to become better, then you're in the right place. We're going to be talking about the groundbreaking science of personal transformation. So welcome to the show, Ryan.
Hey, thanks for having me on, and thanks for creating this space for people like me to share these ideas. You're awesome.
Fantastic. Let's hear a little bit of your backstory then, Ryan. What was your inspiration behind helping CEOs or entrepreneurs, business owners to have their own transformation?
Yeah. So I have a doctorate degree. I did my PhD at Indiana University in organizational behavior. And my dissertation was on leadership. And so this was a fantastic experience that allowed me to review the last 70 years of leadership research. And one of the things that I observed reviewing this research is that there's really one primary question that's been asked in the leadership research domain. And that question is, what do leaders need to do to be effective? And so we've got a lot of answers to that question. What do leaders need to do? And some of those answers I think are really good answers. But that question didn't sit very well with me. I feel like it's a little bit short-sighted. And the reason is because I don't think that leadership is about doing certain things. I think it's about being a certain type of person. And so when I graduated with my doctorate degree and I took a job where I'm at Cal State Fullerton, I set off to do research on how do we tap into the being side of leadership. And so that's been my focus of study over the last 11 years. And then it's culminated in 3 books that I've written: Success Mindsets, The Elevated Leader, and my new book coming out called Becoming Better.
Oh, love that. So let's just talk about being, the difference between being and doing. What would you say to the listeners?
The thing is, I think we're prone and we're used to focusing on what do I need to do, right? If I'm starting up a podcast, what do I need to do? What's the equipment that I need to have? But you probably know this as well as anybody, Karen, is the reason why people listen to podcasts isn't because of the equipment that they have. Of course, they need to have good equipment, right? But it's because of the person that they are, the energy that they bring, and the hopefulness that they carry with them. All of these things are not things that we gain through traditional development practices. We don't gain hopefulness or humility or authenticity or vulnerability by taking a class or by learning something new. Now, those things can help. But at the end of the day, if we want the characteristics of greatness, it's not about improving what we do. It's about improving who we are, our very being. And I've just learned that most people don't really know how to focus on the being side of themselves because we have been so programmed to focus on the doing side of ourselves.
Totally, because it's maybe for some, they see it as a little bit woo-woo. What are you talking about? I've got things to do. Like you say, we've been conditioned throughout school. It's all around the things that we do rather than understanding ourselves on a real deeper level and practicing being. It sounds so out there. So you must have some kind of process to help people through this. How do you help them achieve this, to really focus on their inner being?
Yeah, and so, to be honest, some of the steps to elevate our being can be a little woo. And I think that's okay, but it doesn't always have to be that way. In my mind, there's 3 steps to elevate our being and transformation, elevate who we are. Step number 1 is we've got to get in touch with the idea that we do have a being side. One of the things that I've found that's helpful to think about is we do have an internal operating system. It is wired to operate in our world in certain ways. And this operating system largely resides below the level of our consciousness. Let me give you an example, Karen. How would you say most people respond to constructive criticism? They get
defensive.
right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
defensiveness, can you sense that this is an automatic knee-jerk reaction that is programmed by their body's internal operating system? And that reaction is a self-protective reaction. So there's nothing inherently wrong with that because it's helping them protect themselves, their identity, things like that. But at the same time, that reactive tendency, because it's self-protective, it holds them back from gaining value from that constructive criticism. And if we could create the space so that our body doesn't immediately react to that, but instead we have this wider window of tolerance to create the space to sit with that constructive criticism. We don't have to agree with it, but if we can sit with it, then we could gain some value from it. And that's what I call operating in a more value creating way. So that was just a quick example to bring out this idea that we have an internal operating system. And so that's the first step. We need to understand that we do, and then we could start to get in touch with the quality of the wiring or the programming of our internal operating system. So that's step one, and it's leading into step two, which is we've got to awaken to our altitude along our being side, or in other words, the quality of our internal operating system. And we can talk through some of those things, but I'll just say the third step now. And then the third step is once we get a sense of the current quality of our internal operating system, we're going to have a sense of what a higher level internal operating system will be like. And then we need to now engage in efforts to elevate or upgrade our internal operating system.
Isn't it interesting that I think everybody, wherever they're at, they do understand the fact that there is an operating system running everything, and we trust it to do all the cellular exchanges that are going on in the body every second of every day, even when we're sleeping. But somehow, because of our conditioning, maybe it's linked to schooling, is that we don't tend to trust it for other things. Isn't that crazy?
Well, the wiring that we developed to survive our childhood is not the same wiring that we need to succeed as an adult, as a parent, as a partner, as a leader, as an influencer. So to your point, our body has been conditioned because of the life experiences that we've been through. In fact, one of the things that I'm diving into now in terms of my research is the role that trauma plays in our internal operating system. One of the things that I've learned is that the more trauma one is experienced, the more wired their body becomes for self-protection. And those self-protective tendencies feel we could justify those. Oh, I'm not going to take that risk because of all the problems I might experience. But if we go about living our life not willing to take risks, are we ever going to accomplish anything amazing? No, never. So when we avoid risk, that's us being self-protective, and that's holding us back from being value creating. And that's one of the inherent challenges about doing this being side work is regardless of our current quality of our internal operating system, it feels right and it feels good to us. And so in order for us to truly awaken to our internal operating system, we've actually got to go through what's called a heat experience. Something that challenges us and causes us to evaluate whether or not our current wiring is actually the wiring that's going to set us up to live the lives that we want to live.
Fantastic. And with regards to that, because not everybody's aware, how do they even become aware of this?
It's tricky. And like I said, it really has got to start with the heat experience. So a heat experience can be something external to us, such as had a coaching client the other day. He talked about his divorce and how that caused him to really awaken. I'll tell you a story about me getting fired from a job, getting a cancer diagnosis. Or you can think about a lot of bad things. And yeah, almost everybody has been through this type of stuff, but not everybody has used it or harnessed it to elevate along our being side. So if it's okay, let me share a little bit from my own personal journey. So I joined Cal State Fullerton after my doctoral program. I was there for 2 years and I was just feeling stuck. I'm teaching the same classes. I am doing some research, which I'm finding interesting, but I'm not really seeing my work have an impact. And I'm just thinking, I'm not sure I want to teach the same classes 30 years from now that I'm teaching right now. So I was feeling a little stuck. And so a job opportunity came for me to join a consulting company called Gallup. They do a lot of employee engagement work. And I was really excited about this opportunity. So I took a leave of absence from the university. I joined Gallup and I started to work with them. And I got into it, and there's things that I liked about it, but I also felt like I was pushed into a corner. I was doing some things that I wanted to do more than what they were allowing me to do. And I had been over time just talking to my manager about this. And one day I got on the phone with my manager about 10 months into this role, and I was just complaining again about not having the opportunities that I wanted. And she stopped me. She said, "Ryan, this clearly isn't working. I'm going to have to let you go." And I just got fired. And I never thought I would get fired. And I was married. I had 2 kids. And I'm thinking, what did I just do? And how did I just leave my family? I just left my family hanging. What is my future going to be like now? So this was a very emotional thing for me. And fortunately, I could fall back and I could go back to Cal State Fullerton, which I decided to do. But in this space between when I got fired and starting back up at Cal State Fullerton, I had 2 months where I started to dive in and do research on mindsets to get my research program up and going. And as I started to do research on mindsets, what I came to discover was that I didn't have very high quality mindsets. And in fact, now that I could look back on the situation, I could see the situation, and what I could see is that ultimately, the foundational reason why I got fired was not because I didn't have the knowledge or skills to be successful. I did. It was because I didn't have the mindsets to be successful. And when I work and coach others, when people are feeling stuck, that's generally the case. I then became empowered to go about doing the work of elevating my mindsets. And so that's now what I help people do, is awaken to their mindsets and help them elevate their mindsets. Because what I found is that our mindsets really are the core aspect of our internal operating system.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. I think a lot of more people are aware of this fact. It starts with you. All the sayings that get dropped in, if you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. It does start with how you perceive your world. Would you like to share with the listeners? I did see something on whether it was on your website or somewhere, around the difference between horizontal and vertical development. What are you talking about there?
Yeah, great question. So we've talked about how we have 2 sides of ourselves. We got our doing side, consider that the horizontal axis. And when we improve along our doing side, we're gaining knowledge and skills. That's horizontal development. Vertical development is, if we think about the being side being, vertical development is all about improving along our being side. One of the things that's interesting about this terminology is I imagine most of our listeners have never heard this term vertical development before. And that doesn't surprise me because it's a fairly new term. So it was coined about 12, 13 years ago. But the research behind it dates back to the 1960s from the field of developmental psychology. So developmental psychologists have traditionally focused on childhood development. What are the different childhood development stages? But starting back in the 1960s, they started to investigate, are there adult development stages? And what's fascinating is they found that, yes, there are adult development stages. In fact, there's 3 primary adult development stages. But what's really fascinating about their research is that they found that while there are 3 adult development stages, most adults never develop in adulthood. Most only stay at the base level of the adult development stages. And what we've come to learn is that these 3 stages are a really great way to evaluate the quality or the altitude of our being side. And it's just shocking. Here's what we've learned. If we got these 3 stages, 64% operate at the base level, 35% operate at the second level, and only 1% operates at that third level. So most of us, myself included, have some work to do.
Why is that? What is stopping people from working on this? Or is it awareness, or is it they don't want to? What is holding them back?
Yeah, great question. So one, it's surely because most people don't know about it, and they don't know about vertical development, and they don't know about doing this being side work. And if we don't know about it, we're never going to do it. So that's surely a barrier. But let me also introduce you to this base level where 64% of people operate, and you'll get a sense of why they stay there. So most people at each of these levels, our bodies are wired to fulfill specific needs. So at the base level, the needs our bodies are wired to fulfill are safety, comfort, and belonging. So when we operate in this space, we generally want to join groups that help us to feel safe, comfortable, and like we belong. That could be family groups, that could be friend groups, that could be employer groups. And most people operate in this space. They join an organization, and when they join the organization, they don't step forward and say, hey, I want to lead. They stay back and they say, I don't want to lead. You just tell me what to do and I will do it, provided you keep me safe, comfortable, and feeling like I belong. And if we are wired to stay safe, comfortable, and feel like we belong, the idea of doing development work feels really scary to us. And so that's what I think the primary reason why people get stuck at this level is because they are so focused on just survival, safe, that they limit themselves from exploring living at a higher and operating at a higher level. Because the second level, we'll bring this one to life, our bodies are wired to stand out, advance, and get ahead. Now, this is a significant shift because now we're willing to be unsafe, uncomfortable, and not belong in order to stand out, advance, and get ahead. And this is where we see most leaders operate. In fact, if we break down these three levels by percentages of leaders, what we get is 7% of leaders operate at the base level, 85% operate at the second level where they're wired to stand out, advance, and get ahead, and only 8% operate at that highest level.
I suppose it's uncomfortable being outside your comfort zone, and we have to find a way to accept, to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It sounds counterproductive, doesn't it? That is where everything is, outside our comfort zone. But why do you think so many people are just not prepared to take that step?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of factors. One is, and we'll come back to, I brought it up earlier, is trauma. One of the things that we've learned is that 70% of adults have experienced trauma in their lifetime to the degree that it has caused their bodies to become more wired for self-protection. So our body's natural reaction to trauma is to self-protect ourselves. And that's going to be a barrier that holds us back. Now, there's a valuable insight that comes from this, that if we want to elevate along our being side at a foundational level, one of the things that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to heal ourselves. We're going to have to heal our minds, our bodies, and our hearts. And that's required for upgrading our internal operating system. The other perspective for us to think about, as I brought this up earlier, is we've got to have a heat experience, right? So for me, I was in that base level until I got fired. And that was a heat experience. Now, I was fortunate in the sense that I fortuitously leveraged that heat experience for my own personal growth and development. But what we find is that most people, when they experience these heat experiences, they actually move towards greater self-protection, right? If I get fired, we move inward. If I lose my job, I move inward. If I get a cancer diagnosis, I move inward as opposed to leveraging it to start to move outward. So I imagine, Karen, you're somebody who has a podcast. I don't think anybody who has a podcast would do this from a position of safety, comfort, and belonging. So along the lines, you have vertically developed, you've elevated along your being side, and it almost makes me curious, like Karen, as you're asking me these questions, what was the spark? What was the heat experience that caused you to shift gears out of safety, comfort, and belonging up to a higher level, either towards standing out, advancing, getting ahead, or the third level is contributing, adding value, and lifting others?
Definitely, it was a heat experience, if you like to call it that. It was during the terrible thing that we all went through 5 years ago, COVID. I had to pivot. That's a word
Yeah.
that's been thrown around so much since that time, because I was going in one direction and I could no longer do that because of lockdown. And it was like, yes, I'm in trouble. What am I going to do now? I wanted to learn something. So I put on an online summit and I had 20 coaches, consultants from a physical, mental, or spiritual perspective. And so, I was interviewing them to promote the summit and I just enjoyed it. Somebody approached me and offered me a radio show. And I just said yes. I didn't know why. I didn't know what I was going to do it for. Naturally, because radio is very limited and I just was enjoying doing it, I decided to launch a podcast. It then evolved organically, if you like. But you're absolutely right. It came from, and it's funny, isn't it? So, you're right. Some people, when they're backed into a corner, something major has happened, then they're looking for the opportunities that come. Whereas others, they get so woe is me and they're looking down. They're not seeing the opportunities that can come from it. But the truth is, we don't need that heat experience. People don't have to wait till something bad happens to push them. And that's the shame, isn't it? Why are they not? I suppose we get comfortable, and then when things are too comfortable, and so sometimes we need that pain point. Why do people wait until that heat experience for them to drive forward?
Yeah. So that heat experience can be external, and that's generally how people operate, to your point. But that's why I do what I do, is I believe that we could create an internal heat experience, right? We can intentionally choose to investigate our being side, our internal operating system. And when we intentionally choose to do that, then we can go about elevating ourselves without having shit hit the fan before we elevate ourselves. And so this is what I found really interesting when I work with leaders and entrepreneurs, is that most of them, as I mentioned, are at the second level. And what's interesting about these people at the second level is they know they have elevated, because they know they're operating at a higher level than the majority of people in this world. And when they get there, they think, I think this is going on below the level of their consciousness. But I think they're like, oh yeah, I've arrived. I've come to a higher level than others, and they think their journey is done. It's not. There's still a higher level for us to reach. And so that's what I see as my job. I work with this kind of group of leaders, 85% who operate in the second level, and I want to help them get to this third level where their bodies are wired not to focus on their own success, but to focus on contributing, adding value, and lifting others, fulfilling a purpose that creates value in the world around them. And when we study the very best people, the very best leaders, you think about Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, even some current leaders, when you think about Satya Nadella at Microsoft, Alan Mulally when he was at Ford, Mary Barra at GM. Like, these leaders are at the pinnacle. They're these third level leaders, and they are transformational. If we could get ourselves to that level, that's the impact. We have a transformational impact on our world. And so there's a lot of people that are out there chasing numbers, chasing outcomes, chasing money, right? And that's second level. And you could do good stuff there, but I just learned you're never going to do amazing stuff there. That's what I want to help people do, is I want to help them unlock amazing.
Love that. So if there's any listeners out there that think, then maybe they need help with this, right? Maybe they need to create an internal. They don't want to wait until they've got an external crisis going on. What should the listeners do next? How do they reach out to you, and what can you offer them?
Yeah, for sure. I'll point to a few things. If we're viewing this, I'll hold up my new book. It's called Becoming Better, The Groundbreaking Science of Personal Transformation. So would love for you to pick that up. I'd love to connect with you I got my website, RyanGottfredson.com, all social media avenues. I'm most active on LinkedIn. And I'll give you a couple of things that you can do in addition to this. So just if you're listening to this, I have a couple of free assessments on my website. So at RyanGottfredson.com, I've got a mindset assessment and I've got a vertical development assessment. That vertical development assessment is designed to help you identify which of these three levels you tend to operate from. And if you take either of these assessments and reach out to me, then I'll jump on a free call to chat with you about your results. So if you're a listener and want to take me up on that, then let's do it. And I would love to connect with you.
Wonderful. And all of Ryan's details will be in the show notes. So if you're interested in that, and maybe you're driving at this time listening to this podcast, then please resort back to the show notes to get his details. Look, finally, Ryan, because yes, we're a podcast here, but we're also a podcast production company for other coaches. You use it as a way to promote your books. Would you like to share with the listeners a little bit about how long you've been doing that and what kind of results that you have had from doing this?
Yeah, it's been fascinating. So this is my third book that has come out, and every book that has come out, I've taken a different approach. Podcasting or getting on podcasts has always been a part of my marketing efforts. When my first book came out, I tried to get on every podcast I can get on. I was on over 100 podcasts in the course of the 6 months around the book launch of my first book. I didn't really feel that it moved the needle on my book sales or my business very much. But I knew there was, out of those 100 plus podcasts, there was probably 5% of those podcasts where I did feel the needle move. So I learned that I've got to be selective about the podcast that I'm on. The second book came out and I dialed it back in a very different strategy. I said, okay, I'm going to only get on 20 podcasts, but I'm going to get on the best podcast or the largest kind of listenership that I could get on. So I wasn't on very many podcasts. And I also don't feel like that was super helpful. Ooh. And so this third book, I'm doing a blend of the two. And so my goal is to get on 70 plus podcasts, but to make sure that as a whole, they are all higher quality podcasts. And I consider myself fortunate to be on your show, Karen. It probably says something about the platform that you've created, right? Because now I'm using tools to evaluate the different podcasts, their listenership, their audience, their purpose. I want to make sure that I'm much more aligned. We'll see what happens in terms of the outreach and how it plays out. But I definitely consider podcasts to be an incredible tool for both. I see it for the podcaster as well as for the guests. And I'm just so incredibly grateful for people like you. I don't think you, Karen, get enough thanks because doing a podcast is really difficult. And I don't think that most people recognize the work that goes on behind the scenes. And there's a lot of podcasters out there that don't monetize from their podcasts, at least directly. And so that's where I'm happy to throw people in your direction, Karen, to help some of these people that I've met figure out how to monetize their podcast, because it really is, as I think you sense, the media of the now, at least. I mean, I won't say I don't know how it's going to change in the future, but TV and radio, they're a newspaper, right? These are different mediums. The playing field is becoming more level across the different mediums, and some of them are even falling off. And podcasting has been one that it has been rising. I'm not sure if we're at the peak yet or not.
I don't think so, especially with the rise of AI, because here's the thing, just like you shared, right? Because you have the opportunity to share and showcase how you're different to the next person, because it's titled coach. Anybody can be a coach, or anybody can say they're a coach. They might not have the credentials or they might not have the experience. But, and especially with the rise of AI, anybody can write anything these days, but they don't necessarily have the ability to help transform people's lives. But by coming on a podcast, the way I see it personally is that you get to show up as your authentic self. It's not as scripted. It's different to speaking on stage and having a prepared signature talk, right, where you fit everything in. It's purely conversational. And then people get to see the real you, right, because you can't just keep this act on. They see the real me, right? Me, love me, not like me. It's all good. And you get to show up and serve those who are listening. So yes, I think it's a massively powerful tool, both for guesting and for hosting. So guys, if you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, please get in touch with Ryan if you are ready to take it to the next level. And maybe it's not that you're going to stop doing, but when you start being in the right way, the doing is going to be a lot easier and it's going to be a lot more productive. So look, Ryan, thank you so much for your time today, for appearing on my show. And to the listeners. I will be back next week. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to today's episode on the Podcast Profits Unleashed podcast. If you're